and welcome to a new episode of Talking Law from Women in the Law UK. I'm Sally Penni MBE, a barrister at Kenworthy's Chambers in Manchester, and I'm the founder of Women in the Law UK and the joint vice chair of the Association of Women Barristers. Do please support the series of Talking Law books, which are available on Amazon, with profits going to charity. The latest book, Talking Law 3, celebrates diversity in the law, and you can also find other books from me, Sally Penni, on employment rights, data protection and cybercrime, as well as criminal law and vulnerable people. If you're looking for some great resources for anyone working within the law, please do visit womeninthelawuk.com. Today, I'm interviewing a man who knew he wanted to be a barrister from age 8, Bernard Richmond QC. Called in 1988, Bernard is now the head of chambers at Lamb Buildings and is an active member of Middle Temple, where he became a bencher in 2005. He has also been an Honorary Professor of Law at University of Kent since 2020. There was so much to discuss with Bernard, but I started by asking more about where the aspiration to work in the law came from.
It came from watching Crown Court on television during days when I was allowed not to go to school because I was feeling unwell, or during holidays. So it was on ITV at 1:30 and I watched it. Didn't really understand a lot of it because I was only in my sort of 8th or 9th year, but was really taken by the whole theatre of it and the subject matter and the idea that people had stories to tell, and that's really what attracted me. And then as I got older, I was interested in the process because I've always been interested in the way that the state relates to people, and that's always helped me decide what sort of courses I want to do for exams and things like that. And also because of where I come from.
And where's that?
Come from East London, Upton Park, so near Stratford. So when I grew up in that area, not many people were going off to university. Many people were getting involved with the law in the consumer end or the having things done to them end. And they seemed always to have a bit of a raw deal. So I was quite interested in helping people to tell their story, really.
Absolutely. And did you know anybody who was in the law?
No.
Did you come from a family of lawyers or anything like that?
No. I was the first in my family to go to higher education and the first really to go into one of the professions. And my dad was a school caretaker, fully retired. My mum, a typist in the local area. So no, nobody had any sort of inspiration to give from that way. But what they did do was encourage me to aspire, which was often a problem for a lot of kids in the area I grew up, where the aspiration really was to get through school, get a job, get an apprenticeship, earn a living, perfectly proper aspiration. But there were fewer people wanting to do the university, higher education route.
That's so interesting because you, of course, have given back to the profession. You're not literally a silk who's become a QC and is just enjoying the fees, sitting in your tower and looking down. You teach advocacy, you teach pupil supervisors, as they are now. They were called pupil masters in my day. Like myself, you trained me. I'm sure you've trained so many of us who become pupil masters. You probably don't remember. And you're involved in scholarship interviews, and you're very involved in Middle Temple. So you are actually somebody who's giving back to the profession, and it's wonderful to see, if I may say so. Where did that desire come from to actually be more than just a brilliant advocate in court?
I don't accept the first proposition that I'm a brilliant advocate in court, but thanks for the comment. I think where it started from really was that when I was a pupil, I was pretty short of money, and I managed to get a pupillage award from Middle Temple, which saved my bacon, really. I was the first recipient of an award called the State School Award, which was for someone who came from the state school sector and was only open to them. I remember getting that and very proudly having that badge. But at the time, which was in the late 80s, it was £2,500, which was an enormous amount of money. And it really kept me going. And I thought I would try and repay that. I also remember thinking at the time that 10 years from now, which had been 1998, I wouldn't be such an unusual type of person to be in the profession. It would be a much broader, wider group of people. And that part of what I could do would be to pay back by encouraging and supporting people who wanted to join the profession. Because you've got two types of people often, haven't you? You've got those who achieve something, and then what they seem to do is to try and pull the ladder up behind them.
Yes.
And then there's the
Yes.
other sort, and the sort of people I naturally gravitate towards, who want to throw the ladder down and help as many people as need to come up it do so.
Absolutely. Because how long have you been at the bar?
This is 32nd year.
Oh my God.
No, I was a mere boy when I started.
Well, in that long spanning career, I wonder if you've got a memorable case that's meant something to you, or a case that sticks to your mind.
Of course, Baby P is memorable because I got such a kicking for the way that I questioned the child in that case. In many ways, there were so many ways that you could justify what had happened, and I thought, you know what, I'm not even going to do that. I'm going to try and learn from that. And I'm very involved now in training people how to question vulnerable witnesses. But I suppose that was an important case because it marked a very substantial sea change in the way we treat vulnerable witnesses. So
Yes.
that was important for that reason. I think the case that most sticks in my mind is probably Mrs. Farrelly, which was my first ever Crown Court trial, because I was so young and so inexperienced. And I remember her seeing me in the lobby and turning to her husband and saying, "Good grief, they've sent me an effing boy to do a man's job," and being completely overwhelmed. And I was in front of a fantastic guy called Len Woodley, who was one of the very earliest BAME Silks, his head of chambers,
Wow.
and really inspirationally helpful during that trial. So it was a very weird experience. I was doing my very first Crown Court trial. I had a client who didn't seem to like me very much. I had a judge who didn't look like any judge I'd seen before.
Yes.
Who was much more pro-defence than I'd ever heard a judge be in some of the comments that he made. And it was quite a nice way to start, really. So I remember that, and I remember that really for him and his kindness, I think, probably.
Quite. Now, Bernard, I've asked you already a bit about your background and why you came to the bar, and I'm very keen for people to know that the bar is open to all. But I wonder, what do you think about diversity? I am a Black woman, and I don't see many of me on my circuit. I see more in London, in the Southeastern Circuit, where you are. But not just ethnic diversity, gender, and social mobility. You know, we are improving, aren't we, at the bar, in the profession? But do you think we could do more? And if so, what else could we do? And I mean, for example, what's your chambers doing? Because Land Buildings has actually been doing some of this stuff for years.
We're very mixed in the membership that we have. And we've been very lucky to attract people from very different backgrounds into chambers. And that's been one of the joys of being in Land Building. And that's why most of us who are there stay there, really, because it's a community of people who come from very, very different and diverse backgrounds. And I think that makes for a much stronger place. But I think we kid ourselves if we think that we are a diverse profession. Because what we do is that we are working really hard to encourage people, but into a profession where, sadly, because of the way things are, the perception still is that you need to have private money or have gone to the right school or come from the right social background, and that it's not very supportive of people who come from different sort of backgrounds, or people who are living with disability, or people who are perhaps older and have done other things with their lives. Whereas in fact, there are really substantial pockets of people who are really supportive and trying to encourage those people to come and join what we're doing. And the outreach work that the Inns, for example, and some of the associations are doing is really great. But unfortunately, if we're trying to get to people at the stage they're at university, it's too late. Because one of the problems is you've got to want people to aspire to a profession. And of course, one of the problems for people who come from certain communities is that aspiration is either thwarted or it's not encouraged. So people don't see themselves as able to aspire. And that's why I think it's really important that we're doing much more work in schools. I think we should be trying to promote education programs so that things can go into schools. We can tell people what's happening, what the profession's involved. I'm really keen on the idea that there ought to be a module on rights and responsibilities in the school curriculum. I'm really keen to try and encourage that. So that's my next little project. Now I've stopped being chair of education at Middle Temple. I think that's what we do. We should see the right to speak and have your voice heard in court as a right, not a privilege. And that being able to assist someone with that is a noble calling. But bear in mind, of course, we are an elite in the sense that a lot of what we do, a lot of people can't do. So many people say, I couldn't do your job. And that's the same for lots of other jobs. There's lots of jobs I couldn't do. And so the question is, we've got to encourage the brightest and the best. But we have to be able to define what the brightest and the best means. And I don't think, for example, it means how great your A-levels are.
It's a very, very good point. But it's not a new point, that, is it?
I'd never say anything novel, Sally.
Oh, no, it's a wonderful point. A wonderful point. But I just mean that, I agree with you. But it's a shame that even now we're not quite there with realising that.
But what is different now, which I think is really exciting, is the number of projects that are growing up, which are trying to encourage and bring people in. So years ago, we had the Citizenship Foundation, and that did really good work, but it was very much the only project. But now we've got so many other things, haven't we, that are projects for different types of people, different types of community. We have to be careful that we don't tread on each other's toes, I think, and duplicate effort. But they're amazing. There are some amazing projects out there.
Absolutely. And certainly the criminal bar, social mobility, and Kalisha and all the Kalisha Trust, all of those are great projects. Bernard, I want to ask you about the present. COVID has created an addition to the already existing backlog in the criminal courts. I'm very worried about what that will do, not just for diversity, but actually for practitioners who have been, at the job for some time in terms of retention. And I wondered really if you can see some positives out of COVID, perhaps, using the CVP system for what it is. The computer system means there's no travel.
Except, of course, we've got judges who keep insisting that people turn up to court when they don't have to. So it's really difficult, isn't it? Because I think one of the problems that we've got, particularly for the publicly funded bar, is that there really needs to be a sea change in attitude to the way we do business. So there needs to be a much reduced need to keep dragging people backwards and forwards to court for administrative hearings. These sort of things can be done over the internet and should be done over the internet. And in fact, some of the courts, like I'm very lucky that I practice quite a lot at the Old Bailey. The Old Bailey is really good at doing things over whatever they use now, CVP
or Teams.
Yeah, so you save a lot of time. And I sit as a coroner and we are doing everything over Teams and it's working perfectly well. So I think that's important. I think we have to rethink the way that we ask people to use their time.
That's good to know, and I do agree with you. I wonder, I always ask this question. You already mentioned Crown Court, but who is your favourite fictional lawyer, if you've got one? And have you got a favourite book?
Right. I've got to change my fictional lawyer, otherwise I'll get killed. I would say that it's always been Rumpole.
Yes.
It's always been Rumpole. But one of my friends was in Silk playing Caroline Wheeler, the alcoholic prosecutor, Frances Barber.
Oh, yes.
She did a fabulous job. And so if I don't say she's my favourite lawyer, she'll never forgive me. So I think she and Rumpole are the two. I'm afraid as far as books are concerned, I just change all the time. So I'm afraid I don't really have a favourite. It tends to be whatever I'm reading at the moment. The book which really moves me a lot is a book called Like Water for Chocolate, which is a beautiful book. Very, very short book, but is absolutely beautiful. It was made into a film. So I like books which stir up a bit of emotion and make me think, really.
Yes, I love that. Well, we've got a book club, you see, so we're always looking for books to read. So I should add that to it. And Bernard, with the amount of work that you're doing in court and outside of court, what do you do for well-being? How do you look after yourself? I know you're married, but what do you do to relax? But the burnout rate of the bar, sadly, is high. And we work long hours, and we probably don't get enough sleep. We probably drink too much coffee. So I just wondered, what do you do to look after yourself and regain that mental sharpness?
Trash television. So it's Tuesday. It's Holby night. So Hollyoaks and Holby night.
And do you manage to follow the stories?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I should tell Courtney Griffith QC, who's been on this podcast, because his son was in Holby for a short time.
Okay.
Yeah, so I will share that. Trash television. I love that. Now, I want to go back to the question I asked at the beginning about Twitter and the brilliant work you've been doing through lockdown, actually, to put on workshops, advocacy workshops, and generally encouraging people to come to the profession. But where did your love of Twitter come from? Because you're very comfortable using it, aren't you?
Do you know what? I went on once just to see what it was about, and I had to create a handle. So I created Fat Silk, which arose out of a criminal case where there were these various labels that each of the kids had given people, and so we had a glossary explaining what they were, so what fat was and what moist was and everything else. And so instead of being fat with an F, I thought I'd do that, and I didn't put my name. So originally it was just Fat Silk, so I was like a bit embarrassed, you see. But then someone in my chamber said, well, you can't really do that and make serious comments and not let people know who's doing it. So I added my name, and I had certain thoughts about what I was doing on there. And mostly what I was doing, I thought, was just having a natter with people. So that's how it started. I didn't take it seriously at all. And then it occurred to me that people were actually being quite horrible to each other. And I think I'm proud, and I think I'm being fair to myself to say that I don't tend to be horrible to people, and I don't have arguments. I don't talk about cases that I'm involved in. I personally hate this thing where you say, oh, Bernard Richmond secured an acquittal, thank you, Blogs and Co for instructing me. Because I think the other side of that is you just say Bernard Richmond crashes and burns and poor client goes to prison, please never brief him again. But you never see that. And then it became a way of communicating with people. There was a time a couple of years ago where I bit the bullet and raised the profile of mental health issues at the bar, which was quite a scary thing to do, but was very well received. And then during lockdown, I thought a lot of people on Twitter seem to be very bored and fed up, so I'll do a couple of Xoom classes, and that then spiked into Xoom school, and I think now I've done something like 240 hours of classes. So it's been quite a lot. We've got a gang of people who help teach it, and we're currently doing a case club, so like a book club but for a case. So we had the first one yesterday, and we're doing one next week, and it's great. So I've been very blessed, really, because I've met a lot of new people through that who've been wonderful, and the young people are constantly inspiring and also terrifying because they keep you completely on your mettle, don't they? But
yes.
But I think there's an obligation as you become a senior member of the profession. You have an obligation. That obligation is legacy. And I think it's our job to try and do everything we can to make sure that the profession's in as good a position as it can be by the time we leave it behind. And so, to me, that's what's important.
Absolutely. I mean, you've summarised that so fantastically. Really, you're spot on. And I know many of the people who've been on your case clubs who love it. And I refer loads of people to come onto the Zooms now. Whenever I get CVs from young people, I'm saying, follow this chap on Twitter. And they always say, have you spelled his name correctly? And I said, no, it's definitely not a typo on there. But Bernard, you've been at the bar for a long time. Have you got any advice for women? We're a women's organisation, and men, publicly funded bar or otherwise, for remaining at the bar, because the attrition rates are still not brilliant. Absolutely terrible.
We've just had at Middle Temple last weekend. I just did a class, not a class really, a workshop for people who are returners.
Yes, I saw that.
And that's part of the talent retention project which Middle Temple has started. Of course, I'm involved with Middle Temple. We don't tend to have the monopoly on great ideas. A lot of the other in-circuit associations doing similar things, but we started this talent retention program, and so there've been sort of talks, lectures, classes, workshop, and I was doing the one on advocacy, and we had about 50 people come who were a mix, men and women, people who'd had breaks to raise children, people who'd had it because they'd been ill, I think people who had done other things and were coming back. And I think the thing which each of them shared was an anxiety about whether or not their skills had gone off. So I think what we need to do is to remind people that a lot of the skills which they have are skills which were within them anyway, and that actually getting back out there need not be terrifying. But of course, what you need is to have a set of chambers that is supportive, and if there isn't a supportive environment in chambers, because, for example, it may be that people are spread all over the country working in different places, then we need to have a system of buddying and mentoring and supporting, which makes it easy for people to come back into this profession. Now, for women, I think it's a particular problem. And I think that's a particular problem because, of course, the reality is that women have borne the burden very often of raising their family in the early years. And so there's that gap when they've stopped practicing and they've got to try and play catch up. And so I'm very interested in how you manage, I don't manage, but how you help them manage that return so it's as easy as possible. And also that there are early discussions about what their aspirations are. So I think as a head of chambers, you have to be quite upfront with the clerks and say, well, look, this particular person wants to practice in this particular area. It might be a bit harder work, but we need to try and support that. But very often the problem is not with the clerks. The problem is that in the gap, of course, solicitors have moved to other people.
Yes.
And of course, there isn't really what used to exist in the earlier days when I was practicing, a whole body of chambers work. You'll know that someone will brief you in chambers, and if you're not available, then they'll move it to somebody else in another set. And so it's very hard to create that returns system that used to exist. So I think it's really important that we do that support. I think it's also really important that people do not assume knowledge amongst the people who are supposed to be providing support. So it's very, I'm a white guy from, I'm doing a lovely job that I love. I don't have children. I don't actually know a number of the experiences and struggles that people are living through. And you can't assume that I do know. And sometimes it's very easy to trip up over yourself trying not to say, you're so worried about not doing the wrong thing that doing the right thing becomes almost too difficult to do as well. So I think we need to have an open atmosphere in which people say, well, this is what we need. Let me help you in finding the skills to help me.
Yeah, no, spot on. But I suppose The difference is that you've got a desire to learn, and that's often the best start, isn't it? To find out what are the issues for women and how can we improve. Whereas sometimes we don't always have that. People don't always have that desire to find out. They may say they do, but the practicalities of saying, well, Sally, you've got 3 children and you're managing a practice. What can we do to help you? Is a different thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think little things like if the judge is giving a woman a particularly hard time about getting to court and not having these ridiculously early hours and stuff like that, then I think as the head of chambers that sometimes you need to step in and say, you're not behaving fairly.
Here, here. Now, Bernard, as an advocacy trainer, your name's all over the papers. I see it all in the instructions, which is great. You've written so many. So I'm going to come to you for some advocacy tips now.
Oh God!
What are your? I know, but I'm very interested, and they don't have to be people who are 20 years core, but it could even just be those who are starting out as pupils or they're aspiring barristers. What are your kind of even top 3 tips to be a good advocate? Because you've been, you're very experienced. You are in silk. You teach advocacy, and I'm always open to learn more. So, if you've got any top tips for good advocacy,
I think my top tips would be, firstly, that you should treat advocacy as a toolbox of skills. So it's not about I am this sort of advocate or I am that sort of advocate. There are a range of skills which I should try and have in my toolbox, and I should use the right skill at the right time. So it's a lifelong learning process.
Yes.
So that keeps you fresh and interested. And if you're fresh and interested, it becomes easier to be reflective about your skills. That's the first thing. The second thing, I think, is that you can't deliver any advocacy unless you have a theory of your case and targets. So ultimately, what you've got to do, it seems to me, is you've got to prepare your case and you've got to know what you are actually trying to achieve. The third thing is that ultimately it all boils down to language and the desire to communicate. So you have to make sure that your language skills are as good as they can be. So those are my 3, as it were, introductory top tips. And then for advocacy generally, I suppose the first and most important thing is keep it short, keep it simple, and keep it relevant.
I love that. I'm going to use that in my skeleton argument for the Court of Appeal. Yes, the scariest place on the land. That's so spot on, and thank you for sharing that, because it's really good to just remember and keep in mind those. And what about this, Bernard? We're in COVID. There's a lot going on in the profession, particularly the criminal bar and the publicly funded bar. And I'm just wondering, for young people who might be feeling, low in confidence, as imposters, mental health affecting them, any advice and tips for those entering the profession to help them carry on, if you like?
I think you have to remember that what we are trying to do ultimately is, and it depends whatever area you want to practice, it can be commercial, it can be family, it could be crime or whatever, but we are generally trying to help people who have to navigate a system which can be disempowering, complex and overwhelming.
Yeah.
And so there is actually real value in what we do. So you can get up in the morning, you can look in the mirror and you can say, there is somebody whose life I will affect today by the work that I do. And that's both a burden in one sense and an honour and a privilege. And I think if you want to practice something where every morning you get up and you think, actually, I will make a difference today, this sort of work is exactly what you should be doing. I think the being given by somebody their trust to ensure that they get their rights or what they're due even if they are wrong, I think
Yes.
that is one of the most important things in a civilized society. And in fact, I think you judge a civilized society by the way they treat their least civilized people. And very often we have to do that. And you have to be prepared to get a bad time sometimes in other places for doing it. But I think that's what I would say if you're doubting yourself. There is a reason why you saw this as your calling, what you wanted to do. And that ideal, that important motivation, that will never stop. That's always there. The rest of it, yeah, it's difficult and it can make life very depressing. But ultimately, when you cut through all of it, there are still those people there, those people who are in need of assistance, be they people who are trying to keep their house or their family, or someone who may be about to lose millions and millions of pounds on a commercial deal. They're all there looking for that help. And without us, they will be in a very lonely place where very often those with less honest motivations may take advantage. That all sounds very high and grand, but I think you have
It does, actually.
I think you have to have a high ideal sometimes to keep yourself going.
Yeah.
If you want a more base ideal, frankly, what else are you good for? I'm fit for nothing else, frankly. Really? I'd last 5 minutes in a proper job.
Now you say that.
There is another side to this, though, which is that I'm talking about advising, representing people. That does not just mean the self-employed bar. So you should not see the self-employed bar as the be-all and end-all of that, because there are solicitors doing equally brilliant work. There are people working in-house, working for the GLS, working for companies, charities, law centres, all doing this sort of work. So I think the question very often is finding where you will be most comfortable. So for some people, you might not find that immediately.
Yeah, it'll come with time too. Thank you, Bernard. Now, you sit as a coroner. I've already talked about various things you do. I've heard a rumour about you coming up north as a door tenant.
I am.
Oh, well, tell us more about that, which means we'll see you more on the Northern Circuit.
I've been a door tenant now for a number of years at Central Chambers, which I absolutely adore. It's. I hope I'm going to join the Northern Circuit as well, because you're allowed to join the Northern Circuit. I've done a number of cases in the North.
Have you? I've not seen you.
Yeah, I know. I've done a number of cases up there, and it's wonderful. It's a very different style and pace of life compared to London, and it's a very nice change because you're with a group of people who know each other very well. Manchester is an amazing city, which I absolutely adore. So it's great.
Oh, good. Well, I look forward to seeing you at court. Of course, it's where I practice in the main, which is really great. And what about the bench? And what about, you're already on the bench because you're a coroner. But might the day come where you just sit on the bench as Judge Richmond?
Do you know what? I'm very lucky because I have a very diverse range of things I do that I'm allowed to do. I'm a recorder, I'm a coroner, I sit in the Isle of Man, I teach, and that's all lovely. But ultimately, the thing that makes me happiest is standing up in the courtroom and presenting. And I think judges, to be good judges, need to have decided that they've done enough of that. And the truth is, I've still got things I want to do. I think I'm one of those people who's going to be the player running around the pitch for the pub team when they're 80, rather than the person who wants to go and be the referee. So yeah, I don't see myself as being a full-time judge.
Well, I hope that that continues so that so many of us can learn some more from you. Bernard, one last question, really. I've met your beloved, who worked in the Middle Temple for some years, and I just wondered about inspiration and any holidays you've got planned, the two of you.
I'm terrible. I don't do holidays. I'm absolutely awful. Really. I'm absolutely dreadful. I'm not the sort of person that you would use as an example of how to have a work-life balance, really. I think I'm the person that you put up and say, don't behave like he behaves. And there's a serious point there, actually, which is that I was so fixated with my career that very often I turned down the chance to do things that would have been fun. And then later on in my career, I did do them. I've been abroad many times teaching. I go to the Caribbean most years teaching, which I love. And I think you have to remember that you're working so that you can enjoy life, not so that you can put life to one side. So I think that's a lesson I've learned. I think people need to remember that.
A huge thank you to Bernard Richmond QC for talking law with me, Sally Penni MBE. What a great interview. Please do catch up with our previous episodes where you can hear my conversation and interviews with guests such as former High Court Judge Dame Laura Cox and immigration specialist Gary McIndoe from Latitude Law. If you've enjoyed the podcast, do share Talking Law with your friends or colleagues, and please do subscribe. You can also enjoy our other podcast series, the Law and Guidance Podcast. You can find me and follow me on Twitter @SallyPenny1 or search for Sally Penni on LinkedIn. And finally, don't forget the extensive resources for anyone working within the law are available at womeninthelawuk.com. Thank you to our production team, Sam Walker and Michael Blades at What Goes On Media. Bye for now.